My brother said it at his wedding. Not during an argument, not in a private conversation, in a toast. Publicly, with a microphone in his hand, in a hall full of 120 people, wearing the smile of someone convinced he was saying something kind. The toast was about him, of course, it was his wedding. But wedding toasts often include other people as well, and Misha used that privilege to mention me. My sister Vera has always been there, he said. Always supportive. Always in the shadows. That's where she belongs, and she knows it. The room laughed, not maliciously, lightly, the way people laugh at a harmless joke, at something that seems obvious when put into words. Misha's wife, Katia, looked at me across the table with an expression I interpreted as, "I'm sorry." I didn't know he was going to say that. My mother stared into her glass. My father stared at the table. I stared at Misha. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the room with the expression of a man who believes he has said something clever and is waiting for applause. The applause came. I picked up my glass and took a drink. Not because I agreed, because it was his wedding, and because what I wanted to say should not be said in that hall, not like that, not there, and not by me. So I waited. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to explain who Misha was and who I was. Misha was 5 years older than me. He was a handsome man, and that matters, because a certain kind of beauty creates a certain kind of confidence, one that reality does not always test. He was first in his class, first at university, first to get a good job. Our father looked at him with that mixture of pride and relief parents feel when their first child turns out exactly as they hoped. I was second. Not worse, just second. I arrived later, into a space already marked out by Misha, and I grew up within those boundaries. Vera, the younger one. Vera, the quiet one. Vera, the one in the shadows. It wasn't cruelty. It was a convenient narrative that nobody consciously created but everyone maintained because it explained something complicated in simple terms. I was different, not lesser, simply different. No one ever bothered to find the right word for that difference. Here's what was true. I graduated from the physics department of Moscow University. Then I earned my PhD. After that, I spent several years working in an organization people generally don't discuss at family dinners. The work involved radiophysics and highly specialized problems that required a certain level of security clearance and a certain way of thinking. Later, I was invited to join an international research group. Then another one. Then projects whose names I still do not mention. While I was doing all of that, Misha was building a career in management, a respectable, successful, well-earned career. I never diminished it, either in conversation or in my own thoughts. Yet our family spoke about him as the one who had made something of himself, and about me as the one who worked somewhere. I never corrected them. Not because I was afraid. Because the correct explanation required context I couldn't provide. Because saying, I work in a classified organization and can't discuss the details, either creates unnecessary questions or sounds like an excuse. I wanted neither, so I stayed silent. So they believed what they believed. So Misha said what he said. The shadows. The wedding took place at a country hotel in September. A beautiful place, Misha always knew how to choose beautiful places. 200 meters from the river. Old birch trees outside the windows. White tablecloths. Fresh flowers. I arrived alone. Not because I had no one to bring, but because the person I could have brought was in another city on business that could not be postponed. We agreed I would tell them about it later. I was seated next to some distant relatives of Katia's, kind people with whom I spent the evening discussing the sort of topics strangers discuss at weddings, travel, weather, and the best places to rent an apartment in Moscow. Before the toast, Misha approached me only once all evening. He said hello. Gave me a brief hug. Told me he was glad I had come. I believe he meant it sincerely. He didn't think he was doing anything wrong. That is an important part of this story. He simply wasn't thinking. He was repeating something that had become true in his mind a long time ago, a convenient truth nobody had ever challenged because I didn't challenge it, because nobody else challenged it, because it was too convenient to examine closely. That's where she belongs, and she knows it. I heard those words and thought, no. That is not my place. You have simply spent your life looking from one angle, and you only see what doesn't block your view. But I kept the thought to myself. I drank my champagne. And I waited. The stranger was standing in the far corner of the hall. I noticed him earlier, before the toast, during the cocktail hour when guests wandered around with drinks and talked in small groups. He was alone. Not the kind of person who feels uncomfortable alone. The kind who chooses solitude as a position. He stood by the wall, watching the room, occasionally writing notes in a small notebook. A journalist? No, the attention was different. A photographer? No, there was no camera. A hotel employee? No, the clothes didn't fit. I didn't know who he was. I only knew that he was watching everything differently from the other guests. After Misha's toast, when the applause faded and the master of ceremonies announced the next game, the man placed his glass on a nearby table. He straightened up. Raised his hand. Not abruptly, calmly. Like someone accustomed to having his gestures noticed. The MC saw him and, perhaps more out of confusion than intention, handed him the microphone. May I have 1 minute of silence, the stranger said. His voice wasn't loud. But there was something in it, not authority, not force, something else. Something that made people stop, not because they had to, but because they wanted to hear what would come next. The hall fell silent. His name was Valery Nikolaevich Gromov. I learned that later. At the time, I didn't know him. He was the scientific director of one of the projects I had worked on, not directly, but through an organization that coordinated several groups. We had never met in person. He knew my name from reports, from results, from what in our field is called a work footprint, the collection of outcomes that remains even when no name is attached to them. He came to Misha's wedding because he was a friend of the groom's father, a quiet family connection that nobody had deliberately arranged, but when he heard the toast, he stood up. I learned all of this afterward. At that moment, I was standing with everyone else, looking at a man in a dark jacket who had asked for 1 minute of silence, knowing nothing about him except that he was looking directly at me. I don't know most of the people in this room, Gromov said. And I have no intention of making a toast. I only want to say one thing because I have just heard something that I cannot let pass in the presence of the people concerned. A pause. The young man who made that toast, he continued, said that his sister's place is in the shadows. I do not know this young man. But I know his sister, or rather, I know her work. And I feel obligated to say the following. He turned toward me. The entire room turned toward me. Vera Dmitrievna, he said. I will not mention details that cannot be discussed in this context. But I will say what I can. The work you did on a project I am familiar with, a project that took years, that nobody saw, that almost nobody knows about, had consequences. Specific, measurable, significant consequences. Consequences that protected people. Not metaphorically. Literally. The room was completely silent. People who do this kind of work, he continued, do it precisely because it remains unseen. Invisibility is not a flaw. It is a condition. It is part of the profession. But the invisibility of the work does not mean the insignificance of the person. He picked up his glass from the table. I raise this glass to Vera Dmitrievna, he said. To a person who works where no spotlight shines, to someone whose place is not in the shadow of another person's career, but in a place that requires a special kind of courage, doing something important without demanding that anyone know about it. He drank. For several seconds, the room remained silent. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Then the entire room. I don't remember exactly what I felt at that moment. Not triumph, that would be untrue. Not relief, that word is too simple. It was something like, there. Exactly that. Those exact words, not mine, but spoken by an outsider who had no obligation to say them, That is what truth looks like when it finally occupies its rightful place. I looked at Misha. Misha was looking at Gromov. Then at me. Then back at Gromov, with the expression of someone whose view of the world, held for years, had just developed a crack, and who did not yet know what to do about it. Kavya, his wife, was looking at me. Not with pity. With something else. The expression people wear when they have just understood something they should have understood much earlier. My mother was crying, quietly, without drawing attention to herself, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. The way people cry when they knew something but never said it, and now it has emerged without their help. My father was staring at the table. He wore an expression I had seen only rarely, the expression of a man who is ashamed. Not of me. Of the fact that he had allowed something to continue the way it had for far too long. The master of ceremonies said something cheerful, trying to ease the tension. The room responded, though less enthusiastically than before. The wedding went on. Gromov approached me 20 minutes later. I was standing by the French doors leading into the garden. I had gone outside immediately after his toast because I needed air. September air. The scent of the river and damp grass. He followed me out. Vera Dmitrievna, he said. Please forgive me if I put you in an uncomfortable position. I looked at him. You didn't, I said. I hoped not. But I wasn't certain. How did you recognize me? I asked. We've never met. I saw your photograph in one of the reports, he said. Several years ago. People with a certain type of mind tend to have a certain expression. I've learned to recognize it. What kind of expression? He thought for a moment. The expression of someone who hears what is being said while simultaneously thinking about something else, he said. Not because they're inattentive. Because their mind operates on several levels at once. I said nothing. Were you thinking about something else while your brother was making that toast? He asked. Yes, I said. What about? I looked at the birch trees beyond the garden fence. I was thinking that shadow and invisibility are different words, I said. A shadow is the absence of one's own light. Invisibility is something else. It's when the light exists, but it's shining somewhere other than where people are looking. Gromov was silent for several seconds. Exactly, he said. Then he added, I heard about your work through the project. The results were, how should I put this precisely, unexpectedly high in quality. The group leader singled out your method separately. That's rare. Usually people praise the result. They don't praise the method. I didn't know anyone had read it, I said. The right people read those reports, he replied. Not always immediately. But they read them. We stood in the garden for a few more minutes. We talked about work, not details, but principles. About what good analytical work looks like from the inside. About the difference between someone who sees patterns and someone who only sees data. It was one of the best conversations I had that year. Misha found me closer to midnight. The celebration was in full swing, music, dancing, laughter. He crossed the entire hall and found me sitting at a small table in the corner. I was talking to one of Kadia's aunts, a kind woman who was describing her greenhouse with such enthusiasm that I was genuinely enjoying listening. Vera, Misha said. Can we talk? I excused myself. We stepped into the corridor, a long hallway with a carpet runner, soft lighting, and the scent of flowers drifting in from a nearby banquet room. Misha stood before me and looked different from the man who had held the microphone. Not worse. More honest. Like someone who had shed a layer. Who was that? He asked. The man who stood up. Valery Nikolaevich Gromov, I said. He knows one of Dad's friends. I didn't know he'd be here either. He said the work you did protected people. Is that true? I looked at my brother. Yes, I said. What kind of work? He spoke quietly. Not insistently, carefully. Can you tell me? No, I said. I can't. Not because I'm hiding it from you, but because I'm not allowed to. Those aren't my rules. They're the conditions. He nodded. Accepted it. How long have you been doing this? Since graduate school, I said, with different organizations, with interruptions here and there. But yes. I didn't know, he said. No, I agreed. You never told me. You never really asked, I said. How are you, what are you up to, isn't a question about someone's work. It's a question about their well-being. He thought about that. That's her place, he quoted quietly. And she knows it. Yes, I said. That was wrong. Yes. I didn't think it was wrong. I thought it was affectionate. I thought it meant that you're always there, always supporting everyone. Maybe, I said, but a shadow is the absence of one's own light. You chose an inaccurate word. Yes, he said softly. A very inaccurate word. We stood in the hallway while the music drifted toward us from the ballroom, bass, rhythm, bursts of laughter. Vera, he said at last. Yes? I'm sorry. He said it without decoration. Without excuses that might soften it. Just, I'm sorry. I looked at him. At my brother, whom I had known for 30 years. Who had grown up beside me, who had always been the first to walk every path, and who had grown accustomed to a certain picture of the world without ever re-examining it because nobody had given him a reason to. I forgive you, I said. Just like that? Just like that, I replied. You said what you believed based on what you saw. You saw very little. That's not a crime, it's a limitation. Limitations can be expanded. How? Start asking questions, I said. Real ones. He looked at me for a long time. You were never in the shadows, he said. Were you? No, I said. Never, I just wasn't looking where you were. Yes, I said. Something like that. He nodded. Then he did something I hadn't expected, he hugged me. Not briefly, like he had at the beginning of the evening, really hugged me. The way people do when they want to say something for which words do not yet exist. And I gave him that time. My mother intercepted me as I was walking back to the table. She was standing beside a column, small, in a dark blue dress, holding a wine glass with both hands but not drinking from it. Vera, she said. Mom. I knew, she said. Not the details, you're right, you never told us the details. But I knew you were doing something important. A mother's intuition. I know you knew, I said. Why did you never? Mom, I said. What was I supposed to say? I do important work, but I can't explain what it is. That's not a conversation. That's an empty space. She was silent for a moment. It's still better than a shadow, she said at last. I looked at her. Yes, I agreed. It is. I should have said something, my mother said. When he made that toast. I should have. Not in that room, I said. Not like that. No, she agreed. But earlier. Other times. When he said things like that at home, not in public. I stayed silent. Because it was between the two of you. Because I thought you would sort it out yourself. Because. Mom, I said. You weren't responsible for protecting me from Misha. Maybe not. But I could have. We looked at each other. You were crying, I said. When Gromov was speaking. Yes, she said. Why? She thought for a moment. Because someone finally said it out loud, she replied. Someone who didn't have to. Someone who stood up and said it. Her voice grew softer. I should have been the first. I took her hand. You're here, I said. Right now, you're here. She squeezed my hand. We stood beside that column beneath the muted sound of music, and it was one of those moments that cannot really be explained with words. It simply existed. My father came last. It was near the end of the evening, when fewer than half the guests remained and the music had grown quieter. He found me on the terrace. I had stepped outside for some air before driving home. He stood beside me. Silently. Looking into the darkness beyond the fence. My father knows how to be silent next to someone. It is a skill of its own, and one I value in him more than many others. We stood there in silence for about 5 minutes. Then he said, "What's his name?" "That man." "Gromov," I said. "Valery Nikolaevich." Was he telling the truth? Yes. My father nodded. "I'm glad," he said, just like that. 2 words. No explanations. No apologies. No long speech about how he had looked at things the wrong way or failed to ask enough questions. Just, "I'm glad." I stared into the darkness beyond the fence. "You've always been glad," I said. "You just didn't always know what you were glad about." He turned his head and looked at me. "Yes," he said. "Exactly." We stood there a little longer. Then he said, "You should go. It's late." "I'm going." "Be careful." "Always." That was our conversation. It is always like that. And it has always been enough for me. I drove home at 2 in the morning. Empty autumn streets. The yellow glow of streetlights. The scent of rain that had fallen while we were inside the wedding reception. As I drove, I thought, not about Misha, not about the toast, not about Gromov. I thought about the word shadow. A shadow is a place where direct light does not reach. I work in a place where direct light does not reach. That is true. But shadow and darkness are not the same thing. A shadow is a place beside the light, shifted away from the direct beam. You can see in a shadow. People work in shadows. In shadows, people do things that require silence, not because those things are insignificant, but because their significance is incompatible with noise. I was never in Misha's shadow. I existed in a different kind of shadow, the kind that comes from the nature of the work, not from a lack of worth. Those are not the same thing. Misha used the word shadow as a diminishment. Gromov used the word invisibility as precision. Between those two meanings lies an abyss. I had known about that abyss for a long time. Until that evening, no one outside my work had known it with me. The following week, Misha called. Not to continue our conversation from the hallway, just to call, the way he did every few weeks. He asked how I was. He told me about the first week after the wedding and about a trip he and Katia were planning. In the middle of the conversation he said, "I told Katia about our talk. She's wanted to ask you about your work for a long time. I always told her, Vera doesn't talk about it, so there's no point asking." "Let her ask," I said. "Really?" "Whatever I can tell her, I'll tell her. Whatever I can't, I'll simply say I can't." "That's honest. She'll be happy to hear that," he said. Then he paused. "What?" "She said she felt it from the very beginning. That you weren't the person everyone described. She says you have the eyes of someone who thinks." "Tell her thank you," I said. "I will." "Vera." "Yes?" "You kind of outgrew all of us, didn't you?" He said it quietly. Without resentment. More with something that was closest to wonder, to a slow realization. I thought about it. "No," I said. "I didn't outgrow anyone. I just grew in a different direction. That doesn't mean higher or lower. Just different." He was silent. "I like that wording," he finally said. "So do I replied. Gromov wrote to me 2 weeks later. A short email to my work address, not my personal one. He didn't know my personal address. Brief and precise, the way people accustomed to precision tend to write. He said that his team was considering an expansion, a new direction that required a very specific profile. According to him, that profile matched much of what he had seen in reports connected to my work. He did not make a direct offer. He simply asked whether I would be open to a conversation. I replied, yes. We met a week later. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Not all of it can be described, much of it was not intended for public discussion. But I can say this, it was a conversation between two people who work in the same kind of space and understand each other without unnecessary explanations. At the end of the meeting, Gromov said, "At that wedding, when I stood up, I want you to understand something. I did not do it as a favor. I did it because what was said was inaccurate. And in the presence of a precise person, inaccuracy is an insult to precision." I looked at him. "I understand," I said. "Good." He folded his hands on the table. "I'm not a sentimental person. I don't stand up at weddings to give beautiful speeches. I stood up because the data did not match the conclusion, and that discrepancy could not be left uncorrected." "The data did not match the conclusion," I repeated. "Yes. That is the most accurate description of what happened that I've heard. A good formulation is the minimum professional standard," he said. We both fell silent for a moment. Then, almost simultaneously, we smiled. It was professional kinship, a rare thing. A rare and good thing. There is one more thing I want to say. At that wedding, I did not speak a single word in my own defense. When Misha said, "That's her place, and she knows it," I drank my champagne and remained silent. When Gromov stood up and said what he said, I remained silent then, too. Not out of modesty. Out of understanding that it was his moment, his choice, his words, and that interrupting them with my own would only diminish their precision. I was silent. But silence is not the absence of a voice. Sometimes silence is knowing when to speak and when not to. I work in a place where the ability to remain silent is a professional skill, no less important than the ability to speak. A place where you know things you do not say because the time is not right, because the context is wrong, because words in the wrong place make things smaller rather than larger. Misha thought my silence meant I accepted the shadow. He was mistaken. My silence came from knowing that truth does not need to hurry. Truth lives where it lives, in reports read by the right people, in results that have concrete and measurable consequences, in the mind of a person standing in a garden on a September evening discussing principles rather than details. Truth waited for its moment. It knows how to do that. If you do not rush it. Katya called 3 weeks after the wedding. She called on her own, without Misha. She said she wanted to talk, if I didn't mind. I said I didn't. She said, "I wanted to tell you that I'm glad you came to the wedding. And I'm sorry about that toast." I didn't know he was going to say it, he never told me beforehand. "I know," I said. "I saw the way you looked at me." "Yes," she said. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know whether it would be appropriate. "It's okay," I said. "Misha changed after that night," she said. "Not dramatically. But he changed. He started asking different questions. Not just of you, of everyone. He became slower to jump to conclusions." I thought about that. "That's a good change," I said. "I think he's a little afraid of you now," Katya said. There was no criticism in her voice, something closer to humor. "He doesn't need to be afraid," I said. "He just needs to ask questions." "I'll tell him that," she replied. We talked a little longer. It turned out that Katya was a very good conversationalist. Precise. Attentive. With a sense of humor that she apparently kept hidden during large family gatherings. I thought, I'm glad Misha married her. And one last thing about Gromov. We have been working together for several months now. Not every day, not directly, through the organization, sometimes on the same project, sometimes on related ones. It is a professional connection that never became personal because we are both the kind of people for whom the line between professional and personal is not a formality but a principle. But one day, at the end of a long meeting, after everyone else had left and we both lingered by the window with documents in our hands, he said, "Have you ever thought about writing about this?" "About what?" "About what your work looks like from the inside. Not the details, the principles. The way a person thinks when they do what you do." I looked at him. No, I said. Why not? Because the people who do this work will do it because they find it interesting, not because they want to be known for it. Fair enough, he said. He was quiet for a moment. But sometimes, he said, it matters for people to know that such people exist. For those who don't know. For those who think a shadow is a place. I looked out the window. Maybe, I said. Think about it, he replied. I did. And I told this story. Not because I needed anyone to know. Because Grimoth was right, sometimes it matters for people to understand that a shadow is not a place. It is a word. An imprecise word, and imprecise words should be corrected. Even if correcting them means standing up in the middle of someone else's wedding and asking for 1 minute of silence. Especially then.